The shouting began before the glass doors finished sliding shut. A man in a navy suit jabbed a finger toward the reception desk, his voice cracking through the lobby like a whip. "I don't care what the system says. My appointment was confirmed last night. Fix it." His face flushed red breath, hot and uneven, while the young receptionist trembled behind her monitor. And a few feet away, Ethan Brooks froze mid-step, one hand gently steadying his daughter's shoulder, knowing instantly that he had walked straight into trouble he did not cause and could not avoid. The security guard pivoted toward the chaos boots, thudding against the polished floor, but the man's anger surged faster. He slammed a folder down papers, fanning across the counter. "Do you people ever get anything right?" His voice drilled into the room. Conversations died, heads turned. Lily's small hand tightened around Ethan's sleeve, and the father's breath hitched not from fear, but from something sharper older buried deep. He bent down, brushing her hair aside, whispering, "It's all right. Eyes on me." She nodded, though her eyes flickered nervously toward the unfolding scene. The receptionist swallowed hard and tried to speak. "Sir, the system reset overnight. Your name isn't showing up yet. If you give me a moment. He leaned in closer, crowding her space. "That's what incompetent people say when they've already failed." Across the marble floor, a second man in a charcoal gray suit, slim build, pale expression, the kind of face that tried too hard to be important, watched with folded arms. His badge read, "Victor Lang, Office Operations Director." He didn't lift a finger to intervene. He only smirked subtly, tapping his pen against his sleeve, as if enjoying the spectacle. His eyes drifted toward Ethan and Lily, lingering a second too long. A slow shake of his head, a silent judgment, the kind that carried weight in corporate hallways. Ethan straightened his spine, tightening. He could handle insults, pressure, the daily grind of trying to keep a life upright. But what he could not handle, would never handle, was watching someone tear down a woman who was simply doing her job. Still he stood still. He had to. Today mattered. One wrong move, one mistaken assumption, and his chance at steady work evaporated. And Lily, watching everything with wide eyes, reminded him he had no safety net left to fall through. The lobby lights hummed faintly overhead, casting reflections across the floor like rippling water. Northbridge Systems headquarters always had a certain cold elegance, glass walls, steel columns, and a quiet hum of ambition. But today the air felt different, thicker, charged. The receptionist's voice cracked. "Sir, please lower your voice." "There are children! Oh, fantastic!" the man snapped, turning sharply toward Ethan. "Now they're letting job applicants bring kids into executive offices. No wonder the place is falling apart." Lily flinched. Ethan's jaw tightened. His hand steadied her shoulder again. Victor took a step closer, tapping the pen against his palm. "Sir," he said to the angry man, "give us a few minutes. I'll personally verify your appointment." Then he turned to the receptionist, lowering his voice, but not enough to hide the disdain. "Handle waiting guests more efficiently. This is a corporate lobby, not a daycare." Her cheeks burned. She nodded, eyes wet. Ethan felt the words slice into him, but he stayed silent. He was nobody here. Just a name on an interview schedule, and a father who couldn't afford a babysitter when the school sent out its early closure alert. He exhaled slowly, grounding himself. Lily leaned into his side, small but steady. Then a door opened near the elevators, and footsteps echoed, measured, steady, belonging to someone who didn't rush for anyone. Margaret Hale, Chief Executive Officer of Northbridge Systems, stepped into view with a manila folder tucked beneath her arm. Tall, silver-streaked hair, pulled back, posture straight, like someone carved out of resolve. She wasn't supposed to be in the lobby. Senior leadership rarely was unless summoned. And she hadn't been summoned. Margaret's eyes swept the room, landed on the scattered papers, the receptionist's trembling hands, the angry man pacing in place, then on Victor, whose smile froze the instant he realized she had seen everything. "Is there a problem?" Her voice carried the weight of years, measured low-controlled. Victor cleared his throat. "Just a scheduling mix-up, Ms. Hale. We're handling it." Margaret's gaze shifted to the receptionist. "Is that true?" The young woman hesitated, swallowing hard. Her throat worked once-twice. "Yes, ma'am." "Just a misunderstanding." But her eyes, Margaret saw them. Glassy, afraid, apologetic for something that wasn't her fault. Margaret turned to the angry man studying him with the unblinking calm of someone who'd spent decades navigating boardrooms where men raised their voices to hide their fear. "Your name, Thomas Greeley," he snapped. "I was told my meeting with finance is at 9. And you believed shouting at my staff would make 9 arrive sooner." His face froze. The lobby held its breath. Victor stepped forward defensively. "Ms. Hale Thomas is a major consultant," and Margaret raised her hand. "Just enough. Enough to silence him. Enough to remind him who truly held authority in this building." Thomas swallowed, now visibly aware that the ground beneath him had shifted. Margaret looked to the receptionist. "Take a short break. Step outside. Get some air." The woman nodded shakily and hurried toward the side hallway. Only then did Margaret turn her attention to Ethan and Lily. Her gaze softened a fraction. "You're here for the 10 o'clock interview." Ethan straightened. "Yes, ma'am. Your daughter is welcome to wait in the family lounge down the hall. It's quieter and safer than the lobby right now." Lily's eyes lifted with cautious hope. Ethan nodded. "Thank you." But as they moved past Margaret, something flickered behind her expression. Recognition. No. More like an unsettling memory tugged loose. She watched them go, her brows tightening almost imperceptibly, as if a shadow from her past had stepped unexpectedly into daylight. Victor noticed the shift in her face. His own breath caught. Something in Margaret's eyes, a calculation, a quiet storm, made him uneasy. Because Victor Lang knew a secret Margaret Hale had buried deep one, that involved a man who once exposed corruption inside Northbridge's early divisions. A man Margaret had sworn to protect, but never found again. A man who had disappeared after losing everything because of decisions made inside this very building. Victor's throat tightened as he watched Ethan walk away, because for the first time in years, a cold, unwelcome thought pierced him. He looks just like him. Margaret inhaled slowly, forcing her heartbeat to settle. But the truth she had avoided for more than a decade pressed against her ribs with a terrible certainty. A truth that made her glance once more toward the hallway where Ethan and Lily disappeared. If her instincts were correct, today wasn't just another interview day. It was the beginning of something Northbridge Systems was not prepared to face. Something that would rip open old wounds, expose buried decisions, and demand answers the company had spent years avoiding. Margaret steadied herself, whispering under her breath with a tone colder than steel. "Not again. Not this time." And the lobby, still humming with nerves, seemed to know, without understanding why, that something far larger than a scheduling mix-up had just begun. Ethan followed the signs toward the family lounge, each step echoing off the corridor's polished tile, like a reminder that he didn't belong here. The hallway hummed with the low throb of ventilation ducts and the muffled rhythm of distant printers. Lily stayed close, her sneakers whispering against the floor, her fingers curled around his hand, small but steady. She glanced up at him, searching his expression the way children do when the world feels too big. He smiled for her sake, though tension still clung to his spine. "It's just for a little while," he murmured. She nodded, trusting him more than she trusted the building around them. Inside the lounge, soft chairs lined the walls, and a half-finished jigsaw puzzle sat abandoned on a low table. A muted television played an old nature documentary. Ethan knelt. "Stay here, sweetheart. Stay here. I'll be right down the hall." Lily exhaled, her shoulders sinking a little as she settled into a chair, folding her legs beneath her. "Daddy, you're going to be okay, right?" He brushed a stray curl behind her ear. "I'll do my best." It was the only promise he could afford to make. He closed the door softly behind him. The moment the latch clicked, Ethan felt the air shift quiet, but sharp. A man leaned against the wall a dozen feet away, arms, crossed eyes locked on him, with a strange probing intensity. Mid-40s, trim beard, a badge hung from his belt, Compliance and Ethics Division. The man didn't smile. "You, Brooks." His voice was flat, like a file scraping metal. Ethan stiffened. "I'm here for an interview." The man didn't blink. "That wasn't my question." He stepped closer, his shoes tapping a crisp beat across the floor. "You worked for a federal oversight contractor 15 years ago. Environmental accountability, data integrity, whistleblower protection." Each phrase dropped like a stone. Ethan's chest tightened. "I did," he said slowly. "A lifetime ago." The man's eyes narrowed, studying him as though flipping through memories. "Name's Daniel Royce," he said. "I recognize you from a hearing." Ethan exhaled, once quiet, almost invisible. "I never testified publicly." Daniel tilted his head, voice lowering. "No, but your name showed up in the sealed documents. And sealed documents don't stay sealed forever." Ethan's pulse hammered in his ears. He thought he'd buried that chapter of his life beneath years of obscurity, odd job survival. "Why mention it now?" Daniel leaned in. "Because Northbridge has ghosts, and some ghosts don't stay quiet." His eyes flickered toward the elevator bank at the end of the hall. "Watch yourself." Before Ethan could respond, Daniel pushed off the wall and walked away, disappearing around the corner with the brisk, unceremonious stride of a man carrying secrets heavier than his badge. Ethan stood still, breath caught between past and present. He hadn't expected anyone in this building to recognize him, and he certainly hadn't expected a warning. He headed back toward the lobby, needing air, needing clarity. But when he stepped inside, the tension had not evaporated, it had thickened. Victor Lang stood near the security desk, posture rigid, jaw sharp with irritation. He wasn't speaking, but his eyes were locked on Margaret Hale, who stood with her arms folded, listening to him with a patience that looked more like a warning wrapped in calm. Victor's voice finally cut through the room. "Margaret, we can't run this place on sentiment. If anyone can wander in with their kid and disrupt the lobby." Margaret's tone sliced clean through his complaint. Lily Brooks did not disrupt the lobby. She sat quietly. "It's the principal," Victor insisted, a faint tremble in his voice. "This is a corporate headquarters, not enough," Margaret said. Her voice had the weight of doors, closing endings falling into place. "You seem troubled by a child more than by a grown man verbally abusing our staff." Victor opened his mouth, but the words died the moment he saw Ethan. Something sparked behind his eyes. Recognition sharpened to fear, then smothered so quickly it looked like denial. He straightened his tie. "The 10 o'clock applicant," he said stiffly, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We should get him checked in." Margaret's gaze shifted to Ethan, her expression composed but unreadable. "My assistant will take you to the recruitment wing," she said. "We'll begin shortly." She didn't move. She simply watched him as though waiting for something in his posture or breath or silence to confirm a suspicion. Ethan nodded once, respectful. But as he passed her, Margaret felt a jolt of déjà vu, something about the way he carried himself, the way he shielded his daughter, with subtle, instinctive precision, the way he measured every move in a room watching him. She wasn't imagining it. She had seen that posture before, in another building, another decade, under fluorescent lights that hummed like secrets waiting to detonate. While Ethan followed the assistant toward the interview wing, Lily remained in the lounge, legs tucked close, eyes drifting between the puzzle pieces and the door, waiting for the sound of her father's footsteps. But she wasn't alone. A woman she hadn't noticed before sat near the window, a custodian in a dark green uniform, early 60s, a clipboard balanced across her lap. Her name tag read, Frances Miller. Frances looked up from her notes. "You're Ethan's girl." Lily nodded shyly. "Just waiting for him." Frances gave a gentle smile. "He seems like a good man." Lily brightened a little. "He is." Frances studied the child's earnest face. "Reminds me of someone I used to work with. Long time ago." Her fingers tapped the clipboard, lightly a nervous rhythm. "You two be careful here." Lily frowned. Why? Frances leaned in, voice low. Some places forget who they hurt. Before Lily could ask more, Frances rose quietly, folded her rag, and left the lounge with a limp that suggested an old injury. In the hallway, Ethan slowed as voices drifted from an open conference room. Two managers stood inside, unaware he was passing. One whispered, "Did you hear Hale froze when she saw him?" Like she'd seen a ghost. The other replied, "If that's the case, he's a problem. We just cleaned up the fallout from the first one." Their laughter was thin, uneasy. Doors closed. Silence again. Ethan forced himself to breathe. He didn't know why Margaret reacted the way she did. He didn't know why a compliance officer recognized him. He didn't know why a custodian warned Lily, but the pattern was forming. A pattern he thought he'd escaped. The assistant motioned him into a waiting area. "Someone will be with you in a few minutes," she said, with a polite smile that never met her eyes. Ethan sat. His palms dug against his knees. He wasn't afraid. Not exactly. But something old had awakened. A shadow he had spent years trying to outrun. Someone inside Northbridge knew who he used to be, and someone else feared it. Down the hall, Margaret stood alone in her office, blinds half-drawn city skyline blurring behind her. She reached into the bottom drawer of her desk and removed a thin sealed envelope. Inside, it was a photocopy from a hearing transcript dated more than a decade earlier. A name circled in red ink. A name she had searched for and never found. Ethan Brooks. She closed her eyes, whispering into the stillness of the room. "You came back. Why now?" And the building seemed to hold its breath, sensing the past, stirring beneath its foundation. The door to the interview room thudded shut behind Ethan with a heaviness that felt intentional. The air inside was cooler than the hallway, almost too still, as if someone had lowered the temperature to sharpen edges to keep nerves exposed. Overhead lights hummed faintly, casting pale reflections across the long glass table. 3 people sat waiting at the far end, their expressions arranged like props in a courtroom, neutral at first glance, but brittle underneath. Harold Whitman adjusted his cuffs, eyes narrow and unreadable, the lines around his mouth carved deep by years of forming judgments before facts. Beside him sat Diane Mercer, head of HR. Her posture, straight chin, slightly raised eyes, already assessing Ethan the way one inspects the condition of a rental car. At the far right, a younger analyst, Mark Davison, pretended to focus on a tablet, though his glances toward Harold revealed exactly where power tilted in the room. "Mr. Brooks," Harold said, voice sharp enough to cut paper, "you've had an eventful morning." Ethan sat carefully, keeping his shoulders relaxed. "Only here to interview for the position, sir." Diane laced her fingers. "You understand this is a competitive role. We're evaluating more than just technical competence." Mark finally looked up. "We want cultural alignment." The phrase carried a faint tremor, as though he wasn't sure whether to sound welcoming or threatening. Harold leaned back, tapping a pen against the leather armrest. "Before we begin, I need clarity on your employment gap." His gaze flicked briefly to the file in front of him. 6 years spent in various contract positions, none lasting more than 18 months. Care to explain? Ethan inhaled slowly. Past doors he had locked and bolted shook against their hinges. Contract work gave me flexibility while raising my daughter. I took what allowed me to balance both. Diane's eyebrow lifted a fraction. "So stability wasn't a priority?" "It was," Ethan said quietly. "But safety was more important." The words landed heavier than he meant them to. Mark shifted uncomfortably, sensing weight he didn't understand. Harold set the pen down. "Let's move to your past experience with regulatory contractors." Then he paused, studying Ethan with a focus that sharpened by the second. "Funny thing," he said almost casually, "your file mentions oversight work, but your references are missing. Incomplete. Names blacked out." Ethan felt something in his chest tighten. Not fear. Not yet. Just recognition. "My work involved sealed records. That part of my file is accurate." Diane nodded once, though her eyes chilled. "We know sealed doesn't mean erased, and sealed doesn't mean irrelevant." Harold leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Tell us why you left your oversight role." The room dimmed in Ethan's memory, replaced by years. He had tried to dissolve into silence, late nights, staring at coded reports, discovering falsified emissions data. The tightening noose of pressure, the contractor who warned him to disappear before the case exploded. And it had exploded into hearings, into headlines, into a storm that swallowed reputations, but somehow still spared the executives at the top. "I left because staying would have put people in danger," Ethan said, "including my wife, and later my daughter." Harold blinked. Diane's expression softened despite herself. Mark swallowed, muttering danger from what Ethan met his eyes. People who wanted the truth, buried. Silence expanded thick and startled. Harold tapped the pen twice against the folder, not aggressively, but thoughtfully, as if testing the weight of information he hadn't expected to receive. Before Harold could delve deeper, the door opened without warning. Victor Lang stepped inside, wearing a smile polished thin like old brass. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, though he didn't sound sorry at all. "Miss Hale asked me to observe this interview." Harold flinched, but masked it quickly. Diane straightened her blazer. Mark's fingers tightened around the tablet. Victor circled the table slowly, like a man inspecting inventory. "Mr. Brooks," he said, settling into a chair much too close to Ethan we've met. His tone carried a smug undertone, as if their brief lobby encounter had established some twisted hierarchy. Ethan nodded once. "Yes, sir." Victor smiled thinly. "I want to ensure this process remains thorough." Mark cleared his throat. "We were discussing Mr. Brooks's oversight experience." "Ah," Victor said, eyes glinting. "The sealed file years." He steepled his fingers. "Fascinating chapter. Oversight whistleblowers tend to vanish after their usefulness ends." Harold shot Victor a warning glance. "We are not implying wrongdoing." Victor ignored him. "Of course not. But people with complicated pasts often bring complicated consequences." Ethan felt the shift in the room. Victor wasn't here to observe. He was here to corner him. "Mr. Lang," Ethan said softly, "if you have a question, ask it." Victor's smile faltered for the briefest second. "Fine. Do you believe your past involvement in federal oversight presents a liability to this company?" Ethan exhaled. Slow, controlled, only if the company has something to hide. Diane's eyes widened. Mark froze, mouth slightly open. Harold's fingers dug into the folder. Victor's jaw clenched so tightly a vein pulsed at his temple. "Careful," he said, voice dropping. "You don't know how this company operates." Ethan met his stare. "I know how companies operate when truth threatens them." Something dark flickered across Victor's expression, recognition tinged with unease. He leaned back, as though bracing himself. Before the confrontation could ignite further, the intercom crackled overhead. A woman's voice, Margaret's assistant, spoke, "Mr. Lang, Ms. Hale is requesting your presence in the executive wing." Victor stiffened. "Now, yes, sir." He rose, straightened his jacket, and shot Ethan a final glare, heavy with unfinished business. "We'll continue this conversation later." Then he strode out, leaving a trail of tension in his wake. The room breathed again, though not easily. Harold rubbed his forehead. "Let's regain focus. Mr. Brooks, we need to determine whether you're a fit. Your skill set is strong, but your past complicates things." Diane softened her tone. "We're not judging your character. It's risk management. Public perception. If something from your sealed work resurfaced." "It won't," Ethan said. "Those records were sealed to protect people who couldn't protect themselves." Mark finally spoke, voice quiet. "And you were one of them." Ethan didn't answer. Harold exchanged a long look with Diane, one that acknowledged the unexpected gravity of what had emerged. This was no longer a routine interview. It hadn't been from the moment Margaret paused in the lobby. Diane closed the folder gently. "Let's take a short recess." The three rose and stepped out, leaving Ethan alone in the dim room. For a moment, he sat still, hands clasped elbows, resting on his knees. His breath trembled as memories crawled back from the corners of his mind. Men in suits warning him to stop digging late-night calls that went silent whenever he answered. The night he found his car tires slashed outside a motel 2 counties away. The message had been clear: disappear or be disappeared. He thought he had outrun that world. But now Northbridge smelled too familiar. The tone of their questions, the flickers of fear behind their eyes. And Victor Lang, the smug confidence of someone who believed he held power he had never actually earned. The door creaked softly. Ethan looked up. Frances Miller. The custodian from the lounge slipped inside, closing the door behind her. Her posture was tense, breath uneven, as though she had hurried here. "You shouldn't be alone," she whispered. Her eyes darted to the hallway. "They're digging through archives." Ethan stood slowly. Who people who don't want old decisions exposed? People who don't want you sitting in that chair. She stepped closer, gripping her clipboard like a shield. "Northbridge has skeletons, Mr. Brooks, and some of them were buried by men who still walk these halls." Ethan swallowed hard. "Why warn me?" Her eyes softened with something like sorrow. "Because I saw what happened last time, and I won't watch another good man get crushed." Footsteps echoed outside. Frances slipped back into the hall before anyone saw her. Ethan stood alone again, the shadows stretching longer across the room. The rising tension in his chest no longer felt like fear. It felt like recognition. He was walking straight into another storm. And this time, he didn't know if he was ready. The hallway outside the interview room pulsed with hushed voices when Ethan stepped out, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Harold and Diane stood near the far corner, speaking in tones too low to decipher their silhouettes, framed by the soft glow of overhead lights. Mark lingered beside them, arms crossed, eyes troubled. The moment they noticed Ethan, the conversation snapped shut, like a book being slammed closed. "We'll reconvene shortly," Harold said, offering a stiff nod, before leading the others down the hall. Their footsteps faded, but the unease they left behind clung to the air like humidity before a storm. Ethan inhaled slowly, grounding himself. The silence was deceptive. This building was never quiet. Disturbances here traveled fast, threading through departments like electrical currents. He could feel the undercurrent now, a subtle shift, as if unseen hands were rearranging pieces of a game he didn't know he was playing. From behind him came a soft click. A door opened at the far end of the hallway. Margaret Hale stepped out, shoulders squared. Her expression composed but sharpened at the edges. She scanned the hallway, her gaze settling on Ethan, with a mixture of recognition and something heavier guilt, perhaps, or memory. "I need a moment with you," she said. Ethan nodded, following her into a small conference room across the hall. The door closed behind them, sealing them into a pocket of stillness. Frosted glass blurred the outside world, muting movement, but not completely hiding it. Margaret stood with her back to him for a long moment, staring at the city skyline through the narrow window. Her breath fogged the glass faintly before fading. "You shouldn't be here," she said, finally, voice softer than he expected. Ethan blinked. "I'm only here to interview for a job. Nothing more. That's precisely why you shouldn't be here." She turned, eyes catching the light in a way that revealed exhaustion she rarely showed in public. "Northbridge is not the place for someone with your history." Ethan stiffened. "My history is sealed." "Sealed," she repeated almost bitterly, "but not forgotten. Not by everyone." She paced a few steps, her heels tapping quietly. "There are people here who know exactly what you were involved in. People who were part of decisions you were never supposed to uncover." He swallowed. "You're talking about the oversight hearings." Margaret's jaw tightened. "I'm talking about the events that triggered them, the ones that nearly took this company down 15 years ago." Ethan felt his heartbeat stutter. "I thought the perpetrators were exposed." She let out a humorless breath. "Some were, some weren't." Her eyes drifted to the door, as though expecting someone to burst in, "and one of them still works here." A sharp chill crawled through Ethan's spine. "Victor." Margaret didn't answer with words, but the tightening of her expression said enough. Before Ethan could process the implications, the years of silence, the ruined families, the buried evidence, a sudden voice cut through the hallway outside, muffled but sharp. "Check every file. I want everything on him. Now. Victor." Margaret closed her eyes briefly, then straightened. "You need to leave the building, immediately." Ethan frowned. "If I walk out now, you know what they'll say, that I had something to hide." "They'll say that regardless." She snapped, then softened her tone. "Please. You don't know how quickly things can spiral here." Ethan exhaled, slow and steady. "My daughter is here." Margaret froze. Something flickered in her eyes. Fear, real fear. Where? In the family lounge. Without another word, Margaret strode to the door. Ethan followed the two of them, moving down the hallway with quick, deliberate steps. But halfway there, an alarm blared, a shrill, abrupt tone that reverberated through the building. A voice crackled over the intercom. "Security to level 3. Unauthorized access detected in employee records." Margaret stopped cold. "They're pulling your file." Ethan knew what that meant. Victor wasn't just curious. He was trying to erase him before the past caught up. "Move," Margaret said sharply, pushing forward again. They rounded the corner, just as a pair of security officers strode past their radios, hissing with clipped commands. Margaret kept her head high, her stride authoritative, forcing them to step aside instinctively. Ethan stayed close, the air around them thickening with urgency. When they reached the lounge, Ethan pushed the door open so quickly it hit the stopper with a dull thud. Lily looked up from the puzzle pieces, her eyes widening before she jumped from her chair. "Daddy!" He scooped her into his arms, holding her tight. "We're leaving," he whispered into her hair. "But your interview. It's all right. We're going home." Margaret stood in the doorway, scanning the hall. Take the side stairwell, not the elevator. Fewer cameras. She hesitated, then knelt slightly to meet Lily's eyes. "You take care of your dad, all right?" Lily nodded solemnly, sensing the tension, even if she didn't understand it. Ethan stepped into the hall, but Margaret touched his arm, gently stopping him. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "There's something you need to know. What happened years ago, the case that forced you into hiding it, didn't end the way you think." Ethan's breath caught. Margaret looked directly into his eyes. "Someone tampered with your testimony. Someone inside Northbridge." His pulse hammered. "Who?" Before she could answer, a voice bellowed from the far end of the corridor. "Margaret Victor." He strode toward them, face twisted with faux concern, but his eyes flicked to Ethan with unmistakable hostility. "What are you doing down here? We have an emergency upstairs." Margaret straightened. "I'm handling another emergency." Victor's smile stretched thin. "Oh, does it involve escorting applicants out of restricted areas?" Lily gripped Ethan's shirt tighter. Daddy Margaret stepped subtly between them. "This floor is not restricted." "It will be," Victor murmured too quietly for anyone but Margaret and Ethan to hear. "By the end of the day." Ethan felt a cold certainty settle in his stomach. This wasn't a misunderstanding or bad timing. This was a hunt, one Victor intended to win. Margaret's hand brushed Ethan's shoulder, a silent warning. "Go. Now." Ethan shifted Lily in his arms, nodded once, and moved toward the stairwell. Her small arms wrapped around his neck, trembling. The door closed behind them with a soft metallic sigh. On the other side, Margaret faced Victor alone. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered once, casting a brief shadow across her face. An omen, a reminder of everything Northbridge had buried, and everything now clawing its way back into daylight. Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're losing control of the narrative." Margaret met his gaze unflinching. "The truth doesn't care about your narrative." His lips curled. "Then you'd better pray it stays buried." Margaret held his stare cold and steady, even as her pulse pounded beneath her calm exterior. And for the first time in years, Victor felt it a shift, subtle but undeniable. The past was not done with him, and neither was she. He turned sharply and walked away, the sound of his shoes striking the floor like distant gunfire. Margaret exhaled, leaning briefly against the wall, her hand trembling. Not out of fear. Out of resolve, sharpening into something dangerous. Ethan Brooks had come back, and Northbridge systems would never be the same. Ethan descended the stairwell, 2 steps at a time, the echo of his footsteps ricocheting off concrete walls like hurried heartbeats. Lily clung to him, her fingers digging into the fabric of his shirt. The stairwell smelled faintly of dust and cleaning solution, a cold contrast to the chaos he felt tightening around them. On each landing, dim bulbs flickered overhead, casting shifting shadows that seemed to chase them downward. "Daddy, what's happening?" Lily whispered, her voice shaky. "Nothing you need to worry about," he said, steady but breathless. "We're just leaving a little earlier than planned." He reached the ground floor door. It had a small square window, wired glass, offering a fragmented glimpse of the service corridor beyond. Ethan pressed his ear to the metal. Silence. No footsteps, no voices. Safe enough. He pushed the door open. The corridor stretched long and narrow, lit by fluorescent bars that hummed overhead. At the far end, a rolling laundry cart was parked beside a utility closet. A row of framed corporate compliance posters lined the right wall, everything from emergency procedures to harassment policies, each one a promise seldom kept. Ethan started forward, but a soft gasp stopped him. Frances Miller stepped out from behind the laundry cart, gripping her clipboard with white knuckles. She wasn't supposed to be there. She should have been upstairs, cleaning conference rooms, emptying wastebaskets, performing tasks invisible to anyone who didn't think to look at her twice. Yet here she stood, eyes wide with urgency. "You shouldn't be down here," she said. Ethan adjusted Lily on his hip. "We're leaving." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "They're pulling old logs from the archive logs they shouldn't even know exist. Someone's digging for the whistleblower ID code linked to the oversight case." Ethan felt his breath hitch. Those files were sealed. Frances shook her head. Not sealed well enough. She hesitated, then added, "I know what's happening because I saw it all once before. Same panic, same shadows, moving behind closed doors." He studied her face. The limp, the fear, the recognition that had passed through her earlier. "You were here back then," Ethan said quietly. Frances swallowed. 15 years. I watched things unravel, and I watched them bury the evidence deeper than you can imagine. Her gaze flicked to Lily. "But this time they'll come after more than your name." Ethan felt Lily tighten her hold again, small arms wrapping around him with pure instinct. "Help us get out," he said. Frances nodded. "Follow me." She moved quickly, despite the limp weaving through the service hallways, with practiced familiarity. They passed a maintenance door with peeling paint, then a storage room stacked with boxes of outdated office equipment. Finally, she pushed through a door that opened into a loading bay, where the air tasted of exhaust and cold morning steel. Frances halted near the edge of the platform. "You can exit through the south gate. Security rarely checks the camera feed there." Ethan stepped down, feeling the cold concrete bite through his shoes. "Why help me?" Frances looked at him with an expression layered in sorrow. "Because someone helped me once, and I never repaid that debt." She hesitated. "And because Northbridge chews up people like us, people who know too much." He nodded, but before he could speak, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed from the hallway behind them. Heavy boots, more than one pair. Frances stiffened. "Go." Ethan ran. Lily buried her face against his shoulder as he sprinted across the lot toward the south gate. The sky above was pale, the sun just beginning to break over the rooftops. Cars glinted in neat rows. A delivery truck backed into a bay, beeping steadily, masking their footsteps just enough. Then a voice shouted behind them, "Brooks, stop!" Ethan didn't turn. His body reacted before his mind did. He cut sharply between two parked SUVs, Lily's weight shifting against him as he pushed himself faster. His breath burned, his feet pounded, the air thinned. Daddy Lily clung tighter. "I've got you," he whispered, even as his lungs screamed for air. They reached the south gate, a chain-link barrier with a pedestrian exit. A keypad glowed beside it, waiting for an employee badge. Ethan's heart sank. He had no badge. Behind them, the pounding footsteps grew louder. Then a horn blared. Ethan whipped his head toward the street. A battered blue sedan idled at the curb, its passenger door flung open. A hand waved frantically from the driver's seat. "Get in, Daniel Royce." Ethan didn't question it. He didn't have time. He bolted toward the car, his legs burning every beat of his pulse, thundering through his arms. He slid into the passenger seat, with Lily still clamped around him. "Seatbelts," Daniel barked. Ethan clicked them in as Daniel slammed the accelerator. Tires screeched. The car lurched forward. A security officer burst through the south gate, just as the sedan shot past. But the man was too late. The car was already weaving into traffic, swallowed by the current. Daniel drove fast, but controlled his gaze locked on the mirrors. They sounded the internal alert, he said. "Lang told them you tried to breach the archive server." Ethan scoffed. "That's ridiculous. That's exactly the point," Daniel said. "They don't need truth. They need justification." Lily looked up at Daniel, her voice small. "Are you helping us?" Daniel softened just slightly. "I am." They turned onto a quieter street, lined with modest storefronts and winter bare trees. Ethan finally exhaled, letting the adrenaline ebb, though unease lingered in his chest like a bruise. "Why risk helping me?" he asked. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Because your testimony, the one you never gave publicly, wasn't the only thing sealed after that case. Someone manipulated the record." He glanced at Ethan. "Someone inside Northbridge altered the evidence to protect an executive. And that executive is still here." Ethan's pulse surged. "Victor." Daniel didn't answer. Silence stretched between them until the car slowed at a red light. Daniel finally spoke, his voice hushed and deliberate. "You weren't the only whistleblower. There was another contributor, anonymous, codename Gray Lantern. Their insights exposed the final link in the cover-up." Ethan frowned. "I never learned who that was." Daniel's eyes flicked toward him, then toward Lily. Ethan froze. "No, it can't be." Daniel nodded once. Gray Lantern was someone inside Northbridge. Someone who vanished from the workforce records right after the hearings. Someone who stayed invisible until today. Ethan felt the pieces shift, rearranging into a shape he wasn't prepared for. Then Daniel said the name, Francis Miller. The revelation hit with a force that stole Ethan's breath. The quiet custodian, the limp, the warning in her eyes, the sorrow in her voice. She wasn't just a witness. She was part of the truth he had spent years running from. Ethan stared straight ahead, the world outside the windshield blurring. Lily reached for his hand, grounding him. Daniel pressed harder on the gas. "You need to understand something, Ethan. If Francis is Gray Lantern, and if Victor knows she recognized you today, then both of you are targets." Ethan's grip tightened around Lily's hand. "What do they want?" he asked. Daniel's answer was quiet and chilling. To finish what they started 15 years ago, erase the final witnesses, and bury the story forever. The light turned green. The car sped forward. And in the space between breaths, Ethan understood one truth with terrifying clarity. He hadn't just returned to Northbridge. He had stepped back into a war he never knew was still being fought. Daniel drove in tense silence, jaw-locked eyes sweeping the mirrors with the vigilance of someone who had lived far too long, expecting threats to come from behind. The city blurred past in gray strokes, buildings stretching like watchtowers over the frozen streets. Inside the car, the air felt tight, heavy, with the weight of truths that had gone unspoken for years. Ethan kept one arm wrapped around Lily, feeling her small heartbeat flutter against his chest like a frightened bird. Every few seconds, she looked up at him, searching for reassurance, and he tried desperately to offer it. "Where are we going?" Ethan finally asked. "A place they won't look," Daniel said. "For now." "For now," Ethan repeated, voice sharp. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He turned left, onto a narrow side street, lined with brick warehouses, each one shuttered, weathered, forgotten. He slowed the car, pulling behind a building whose faded sign read, "Hail Charter Logistics." The name struck Ethan like a sudden spark. "Hail," he murmured. "As in, yes," Daniel said. "As in Margaret Hale's father." The car rolled to a stop. Daniel cut the engine, turned to face him fully, and the steel in his expression softened, not with pity, but with resignation. "You should know," Daniel said quietly. "Her father was the one who opened the first investigation into Northbridge's emissions fraud all those years ago." Ethan's breath stilled. The memory hit him like cold water late nights, reading through coded documents, discovering patterns in altered data streams, realizing it didn't end with the manufacturer, but branched into a network of consultants, auditors, and subcontractors. He had been naive then, believing truth naturally won. Margaret's father had believed that too, and he'd paid for it. Lily tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, are we hiding?" Ethan cupped her face gently. "We're staying safe, just for a little while." Daniel stepped out of the car. "Come on, inside." The building looked abandoned, but as Daniel unlocked the steel door, using a code rather than a key, Ethan realized the interior was meticulously kept. Clean concrete floors, shelves stacked with old binders, a small workspace in the back with 2 outdated monitors and a rolling chair that had seen better days. A faint smell of dust coffee and old secrets clung to the air. This was Hale's private archive, Daniel said. Margaret's father stored documents here before his stroke. Notes, evidence, everything he couldn't trust to keep at Northbridge. Ethan glanced around, heart pounding with familiarity. "You worked for him." Daniel nodded. "Until the night someone tried to run my car off the highway. After that, I stopped asking who was behind the sabotage and focused on staying alive." Lily settled into an old chair, pulling her knees close. Ethan watched her for a moment before turning back to Daniel. "Tell me everything Ethan said. All of it." Daniel leaned against the desk, arms crossed. 15 years ago, Northbridge was on the brink of a major expansion. A multi-billion-dollar contract with the federal government. But they were falsifying compliance data. Hale Sr. caught it. So did you. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. "I didn't know anyone else was working the case internally. That's because you weren't supposed to," Daniel replied. "Your findings and Margaret's father's findings were linked. You both identified the same pattern, the same signature manipulation, and someone inside Northbridge panicked." "The air thickened," Victor Ethan said. "He was one of several involved," Daniel replied. "But he was the only one smart enough to destroy the paper trail, and the only one ruthless enough to silence people." Daniel looked toward the far shelves. Hale Sr. survived the sabotage attempt by luck, but he was never the same after the stroke. And Margaret, Ethan asked softly. Daniel hesitated. She believed her father had been targeted. She dug. She pushed. She asked questions. That's why she was sent to the subsidiary division in Chicago for 6 years, to get her out of the way. When she returned, the old guard assumed she knew nothing. Ethan closed his eyes. "So she recognizes me because she saw my name in her father's hidden files." Daniel nodded once. "And because you carry yourself the way people do when they've been hunted." Silence hung between them. Ethan's thoughts churned old fears, rising like ghosts from the past. He remembered the threats, the slashed tires, the anonymous notes, the job reassignments meant to isolate him, his wife telling him they should leave the state, start over, disappear. And then the night she didn't come home from the clinic. He squeezed his eyes shut. A tremor passed through him. Lily, sensing the shift, left her chair and wrapped her arms around his waist. Daniel lowered his voice. "Listen carefully. Victor is not just trying to discredit you. He's trying to erase every connection between you, Hale Sr., and the original oversight case. If you walk into Northbridge again unprepared, you won't walk out the same way." Ethan steadied himself. "What do you want me to do? I want you to look at something." Daniel rummaged through a drawer, pulling out a thick binder, secured with a metal clip. He set it on the desk, flipped it open, revealing pages of printed emails, data logs, and annotations in blue ink, Hale Sr.'s handwriting. Then he turned to a page marked with a faded yellow tag. Ethan felt the breath leave his lungs. A redacted testimony summary. A reference code linking Ethan's whistleblower file to another contributor, Gray Lantern, Underneath the code, faint but legible, a handwritten note read, "Lantern's access compromised. Must protect the source. Relocation arranged. Only one inside Northbridge knows she survived. Frances." Ethan whispered her name. "She's the missing witness." Daniel nodded. "And she's in danger, more than you." Suddenly the door rattled. Daniel froze. Ethan grabbed Lily instinctively. A voice filtered through the door, muffled but unmistakable. "Open it. Now." "Victor Lang." Daniel mouthed, "Don't move," then crossed the room quickly and switched off the lights. The building fell into darkness, leaving only the faint amber glow from the street filtering through cracked blinds. The door handle shook violently. Daniel Victor's voice hissed, "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Daniel motioned Ethan toward a storage alcove across the room. Ethan lifted Lily and slipped behind stacked crates, heart pounding in his throat. Victor pounded again. Last chance. Then silence. A long, agonizing silence. Daniel leaned toward the door, listening. His breath slowed, sweat trickled down his temple, and then footsteps, but moving away, not toward. Victor was leaving. For now. Daniel exhaled shakily. "He knows we're together," he murmured. Ethan emerged from the shadows. "Why didn't he break in?" "Because he doesn't want to alert Hale," Daniel said. "Not yet. He wants to corner you without leaving a trail." Ethan felt a cold certainty settle deep within him. "We need to find Frances. She's the only one who knows what really happened." Daniel nodded grimly. "I've been searching for her address. She's not listed anywhere." Ethan's eyes darkened. "Then we find her at the one place she'd never abandon." Lily's voice lifted soft and brave. "Her work." Daniel met Ethan's gaze. "Northbridge," he said. Ethan held his daughter close and whispered, "Then we go back. But this time we're not running." Outside, the winter wind howled against the old warehouse walls, and far across the city, in a tower of glass and steel, Margaret Hale stood alone in her office, staring at the sealed envelope on her desk, the one bearing Ethan's name, and understood that everything she had built was about to ignite. Snow flurries drifted across the windshield as Daniel guided the sedan toward the industrial district, each gust smudging the city into a gray watercolor. The streets had thinned with late morning quiet, the kind that felt unnatural, too still, too watchful. Ethan sat forward in the passenger seat, shoulders tight, mind racing through possibilities that all circled back to the same truth: they were walking into danger. Lily slept in the back seat, her cheek pressed against her jacket, breath warm against the cold leather. Every rise and fall of her chest reminded him why he couldn't turn back. Daniel slowed near a row of loading docks behind Northbridge's main complex. The building loomed above them, steel and glass, reflecting the pale sky. High windows glinted like eyes, invisible ones that had watched them before. "We don't go in blind," Daniel said, pulling the car beneath an overhang where the security cameras were blind. "We find Frances. We get her out, and we leave. You don't talk to leadership unless we're outnumbered or out of options." Ethan braced his elbows on his knees. "Frances isn't just a witness. She's leverage." "They'll know that. They know more than that," Daniel said. "They know she's the only one Hale Sr. trusted when everything collapsed." Ethan met Daniel's gaze. "And they know she recognized me." Daniel nodded once the motion clipped. "Which means Victor will reach her before anyone else if he can." The thought twisted Ethan's gut. Frances had risked herself to warn them. She didn't deserve to be dragged back into a war she'd already survived once. A sharp tapping at the window made both men jolt. "Open up," whispered a voice through the glass. Ethan froze. It was Frances. She stood beside the car, clutching her clipboard to her chest, her uniform dusted with snow. Her breath came in short bursts, fogging the air. She glanced over her shoulder twice before Daniel unlocked the door and pulled her inside. "I didn't go home," she said, voice trembling. "I knew they'd look for me there." "You shouldn't have come out here alone," Ethan said, sliding into the back seat, with her careful not to disturb Lily. Frances shook her head. "I couldn't stay put. They're purging the old HR logs. Not just yours. Mine too. They've reactivated the internal audit protocols. That only happens when someone high up wants to erase an entire era." Daniel muttered a curse under his breath. "They're trying to rewrite the history." "They already started," Frances whispered. "There's no trace of Grey Lantern in the system anymore, not even in the shadow logs. It's like I never existed." Her lips quivered, like they're preparing to make it true. Ethan steadied her with a hand on her shoulder. "You're safe with us." "No," she said sharply, eyes glistening. "Not unless you understand what they're really after." Daniel stiffened. "What do you mean?" She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. Her fingers trembled as she handed it to Ethan. He opened it. A serial number. A file location code. One phrase written in shaky ink, key evidence. "Hale Sr. not yet destroyed." Daniel inhaled sharply. "Where did you get this?" "He kept duplicates," Frances whispered. "The founder. Before the stroke." He didn't trust anyone in the executive suite, except his daughter. He hid a physical copy in the old document vault beneath the West Wing. Ethan pictured the vault, one of the oldest parts of the building, rarely accessed, sealed behind biometric locks. If it still exists, it's the only proof left. "And the only thing Victor can't bury digitally," Daniel added. Frances nodded. "They'll go for it soon. It's the last loose thread." A siren wailed faintly in the distance. The wind carried it like a warning. Daniel gripped the steering wheel. "Then we beat them to it." Ethan checked on Lily, who slept still unaware of the storm tightening around them. "She stays with you," he told Frances. "Daniel and I will go." "No," Frances said. "You'll never get in. They won't let two men they don't trust anywhere near the restricted wing. But they will let an old custodian with a clearance badge walk across that hallway unnoticed." Ethan frowned. "You shouldn't risk yourself." Her smile was faint, sad. "Risk is all I've ever had. Besides, they erased me from the system, remember?" "That cuts both ways." Daniel hesitated. "We'll shadow you from the maintenance tunnel. The vault connects through the lower conduits." Frances nodded. "Then we'd better move." They exited the car into biting cold. Snow stung their faces as they crossed the loading bay. Frances walked ahead, posture straight clipboard, tucked under her arm, a woman blending into a world that forgot she existed. Daniel and Ethan slipped through a rusted side door leading into the maintenance corridor. The tunnel was narrow, lined with pipes and humming electrical conduits. The air smelled of metal and damp insulation. Ethan moved with careful steps, his flashlight beam slicing through the dim. Daniel whispered, "She's heading for the freight elevator. We'll meet her 2 levels down." Ethan's breath fogged in the cold. "What will we find in the vault?" Daniel paused long enough for the silence to gain weight. Truth no one wanted to read. They pressed deeper into the building's underbelly. Overhead, muffled footsteps echoed the rhythmic march of security patrols sweeping the floors. Ethan slowed at each intersection, listening for danger. Every sound amplified the hiss of steam, the faint clatter of metal settling the soft hum of electricity. The corridor curved, splitting into 2. Daniel checked his map. The left passage connects behind the vault's mechanical room. From there, we can A door slammed above them. Both men froze. Voices drifted down through the metal grate. Francis Miller was spotted near the freight lift. Victor. Ethan felt heat rise beneath his ribs. "Spread out," Victor ordered. "She won't get far, and if Brooks is with her, bring him to me." Daniel clenched his jaw. "They're moving faster than I thought." Ethan's muscles coiled. "We need to reach her first." They ran. Their footsteps pounded through the tunnel, breath echoing off the walls. Ethan turned a corner and collided with a steel door. He shoved it open, slipping into a small mechanical chamber filled with rumbling machines and copper pipes. Daniel checked the ceiling. There. That hatch leads into the vault corridor. He climbed first, pushing open the grate. Ethan followed. The hallway above was dim industrial, thick with dust. The vault door stood 50 feet ahead, an enormous slab of reinforced steel with a biometric lock panel flickering in blue. But Francis wasn't there. Ethan's stomach twisted. "Where is she?" Then he saw it, a faint scuff mark on the floor. Fresh. A custodial shoe dragged sideways as if pulled. Daniel knelt inspecting it. They got to her. Ethan swallowed hard. "Then she's not far." A soft sound echoed down the hallway. A muffled cry. Ethan bolted toward it before Daniel could stop him. He rounded the corner and froze. Francis stood between two security officers, wrists pinned behind her. Her eyes widened when she saw him. "No," she mouthed. "Run." Victor stepped out from behind the officers, his expression smooth as glass, his smile thin and triumphant. "Well," he said, folding his hands behind him, "I knew you'd come back for the vault, Ethan. Men like you can't resist unfinished stories." Ethan felt his pulse thunder. Victor stepped closer, eyes gleaming with something cold. "You walked back into history's jaws." He leaned slightly, voice lowering. "And this time no one's pulling you out." Daniel moved beside Ethan, tension radiating through him, ready to act, but knowing any wrong move could end disastrously. Victor motioned lazily toward the vault. "Shall we all go inside? I believe we've reached the chapter where the witnesses disappear." Ethan stepped forward, fists tightening, breath sharp. But before he could speak, a new voice rang down the corridor. "That's enough, Victor. Clear, commanding, steady as judgment." Margaret Hale stood at the end of the hallway. Shoulders squared her presence, slicing through the tension like a blade. Victor's smile faltered, and for the first time, fear glimmered behind his eyes. Margaret's heels struck the concrete floor with a precision that made every man in the corridor straighten, as if the building itself recognized her authority. The dim light from overhead fixtures carved sharp lines along her face, highlighting the cold determination in her eyes. She walked directly toward Victor, each step steady, unwavering, the steps of someone who had stopped caring about political consequences the moment a line had been crossed. Victor recovered his smile too quickly. "Margaret," he said, spreading his arms, voice syrup sweet. "I didn't expect you to be down here. This is a restricted wing." And yet she said without slowing, "You seem comfortable conducting illegal detentions in it." Victor's jaw twitched. He lowered his hands, posture stiffening as she came to a stop just a few feet away. Francis trembled between the two officers, her breath shallow. Her eyes locked on Margaret like a drowning woman spotting the faintest chance of air. "Release her," Margaret said. The officers hesitated. Victor stepped forward. "You don't have the full context. Release her," Margaret repeated. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It carried the same force as a slammed gavel, final absolute. The officers exchanged a glance, then slowly let go of Francis, who stumbled forward into Margaret's waiting arm. Margaret steadied her gently. "You're safe now," she whispered. But her eyes, when they lifted to Victor's, were cold steel. "You're interfering in an internal security matter," Victor said, his composure cracking. No, Margaret replied. I'm stopping a criminal one. The words floated heavy and electric through the corridor. Victor laughed, once brittle. Criminal Francis trespassed into a restricted zone. Brooks fled a scheduled interview and attempted unauthorized access to archival property. And you, he added, pointing, have been making decisions based on outdated conspiracy theories your father never put to rest. Daniel stepped forward. You erased the evidence. We both know it. Victor's expression sharpened. Be careful, Royce. You're already on thin ice. Thin ice, Daniel echoed. Victor, you're standing on a frozen lake that's been cracking for 15 years. Victor's eyes flicked to Ethan. You never should have come back, he said quietly. You're dredging up things that were settled long ago. Settled. Ethan stepped forward. You mean buried. Victor didn't deny it. His silence answered for him. Margaret released Francis gently and moved to stand between the two groups. The vault door loomed behind her, its biometric panel glowing faintly, waiting for a command. It was a witness too silent heavy, holding decades of truths no one had dared open. Victor Margaret said, her voice calmer now, almost eerily so, step away from the officers. He didn't move. Her tone hardened. Last warning. Victor's eyes narrowed, but something in them flickered, recognition of a shift he hadn't accounted for. He slowly stepped back, hands at his sides, though the tension in his stance remained coiled. Margaret turned to Francis. You have your badge. Francis nodded, pulling the worn plastic card from her pocket. Margaret stepped toward the vault, eyes fixed on the panel. Then we're going to settle this right now. Victor lunged forward. You open that door and you'll destroy this company. No, Margaret said, entering her credentials. With steady fingers, you destroyed this company. I'm saving it. The panel beeped. The heavy bolts thudded inside the metal frame, unlocking. A low mechanical groan rolled down the hallway as the vault door inched open. Cold air swept out, carrying the dusty smell of old paper and forgotten truths. Inside, shelves lined the walls, packed with binders, sealed envelopes, boxes. Documents decades old, untouched, untampered. Victor's voice shook as he stepped forward. Margaret, stop. You don't know what's in there. I know exactly what's in here, she said. My father kept a duplicate of every report the oversight team sent him, and you were counting on the world forgetting that. The color drained slightly from Victor's face. Daniel exhaled with something like vindication. Ethan felt the tension in his shoulders ease, though only slightly. Francis simply stared, tears trembling in her eyes. Margaret entered the vault. Her footsteps echoed softly. She scanned the rows until her fingers brushed a box labeled in her father's handwriting. Year 17. Case Documentation Integrity Division. She lifted the lid. Inside was a sealed envelope with Ethan's whistleblower ID code, and beneath it another envelope. Gray Lantern. Margaret held them both, the weight significant, almost reverent. Then she turned back to the group. 15 years ago, she said my father believed the truth mattered more than the company's reputation. He believed transparency would purify what corruption had stained. She paused. He was punished for that. Victor stepped into the doorway. You're about to repeat his mistake. No, Margaret replied. I'm about to correct it. Victor's mask finally cracked. Do you think the board will stand with you? He hissed. Do you think investors will tolerate the largest scandal in our history being dragged back into the light? Maybe not. Margaret said, but I'd rather lose a company than lose my soul. Victor lunged again. Daniel moved first, intercepting him with a shoulder block that shoved him hard against the steel frame. The officers tensed, but Margaret raised a hand. Enough. He's done giving orders. Victor struggled, fury twisting his face. "You won't survive this hail. I'll take the board. I'll take the shareholders. I'll take every investor with me." "You assume," Margaret said quietly, "they still trust you." Her voice was the calmest thing in the room, and somehow the most terrifying. Ethan stepped closer to the vault entry. "What happens now?" Margaret held out the 2 envelopes, Ethan's and Francis's. "Now we tell the truth, all of it." Francis shook her head weakly. "It's too dangerous. They'll come after all of us." Margaret met her gaze. "Then let them. But they won't win this time." Before anyone could respond, a sharp burst of static erupted from overhead speakers. A voice crackled through security dispatch. "All units report to Level 3. Immediate lockdown in effect." Victor smiled. "You opened the vault," he whispered. "That triggered the protocol. Now none of us leave." Ethan's heart pounded. "What does that mean?" Margaret stared at the vault, understanding dawning slow chilling. "It means the building just became a cage." The overhead lights flickered. The doors at both ends of the corridor slid shut with metallic finality. Francis backed away until she hit the wall, breath shaking. Daniel swore under his breath. Victor straightened his jacket, regaining confidence, like a man stepping back onto familiar terrain. "You wanted the truth, Margaret," he said softly. "Then let's see if you can survive it." Ethan reached for Lily's hand, only to remember she wasn't with him. Panic surged, icy and immediate. Margaret saw the terror in his eyes. "She's with my assistant on Level 2. She'll be protected." She tried to believe it, but Victor's smile said otherwise. The building hummed around them, lights dimming further, the air growing heavier. The vault stood open behind them, the past in boxes, the danger in the present, and the future closing in like a tightening fist. The lights dimmed to half power, humming louder, as if the building itself sensed the shift from order to danger. Ethan steadied his breath eyes, flicking to every corner of the corridor, instinct sharpening like a blade. The vault behind them felt colder now, its open door, a mouth swallowing light. Victor stood near the far wall posture, loose, almost casual, though a glint in his eyes betrayed the satisfaction of a man watching the first domino tip. Margaret stepped closer to Ethan, her voice low, urgent. "We need to get to Level 2. Your daughter is the priority." "Agreed," Daniel said, already pulling the small flashlight from his pocket. "Lockdown protocols seal vertical movement first. If we don't reach the stairs in the next minute, we're stuck." Victor chuckled softly. "You won't get far. Every stairwell is barricaded during high-level lockdown. But by all means run. It won't change the ending." Ethan turned in one sharp motion. "You won't lay a hand on her?" "That remains to be seen," Victor said, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve. Francis inched toward Margaret, her breath uneven. "We can still reach the utility shaft near the archives staircase. It bypasses most automated seals. That shaft is barely wide enough to crawl through," Daniel warned. "It's wide enough for a child," Francis whispered. She didn't need to say more. Ethan's heart jolted cold and fast. He grabbed the envelopes from Margaret, tucking them inside his jacket. "We move now." Margaret nodded and took the lead. Together, they sprinted down the dim corridor, footsteps echoing in uneven rhythms. The overhead bulbs flickered, casting jittery shadows that stretched and contracted like restless specters. The first stairwell door was locked. The second sealed by a steel bar that had dropped from the ceiling like a guillotine. The third blocked by an interior shutter reinforced with bolts. Victor had not exaggerated. Northbridge's lockdown procedures were built for entrapment, not protection. Here, Francis hissed, pointing to a narrow maintenance hatch behind a stack of obsolete server crates. "I used to slip through here when the elevators broke during winter storms." Margaret and Daniel wrestled the crates out of the way. Dust billowed into the air, stale and thick, stinging their throats. When the hatch finally revealed itself, it was much smaller than Ethan expected, more crawl space than passage. Daniel knelt, testing the latch. It clicked open with a metallic groan. Francis turned to Ethan. "Lily's small. She'll fit. You can follow her." "But what about the rest of you?" Ethan demanded. "We'll find another route," Margaret said firmly. "You go. Now." Footsteps erupted behind them. Victor's voice sliced through the corridor. "There they are!" 3 security officers charged forward. Daniel slammed the hatch open, shoving Ethan toward it. "Go." Ethan dropped to his knees, heart hammering. "Lily first. I can't leave without her." "Then you get her," Margaret said, and before he could object, she pressed her access card to the hatch's hidden sensor. A second lock clicked open. Daniel cast one look at Ethan. "Move fast, and whatever happens, don't lose those files." Ethan crawled inside, pulling the hatch shut behind him, just as Victor shouted, "Stop him!" The metal door slammed shut. Darkness swallowed him broken only by a thin strip of light filtering through gaps in the steel. The tunnel was narrow, lined with old cables and ducts. Dust clouds lifted with every movement. Ethan's shoulders scraped both sides, the metal biting through his shirt. But none of it mattered, not compared to the single thought pounding through him like a pulse. Get to Lily. He crawled faster, breaths shallow each exhale, stirring the dust. The tunnel curved left, then right, descending slightly. Cold air leaked from vents above, chilling the sweat on his neck. Behind him, faint banging reached his ears. Victor's men, trying to pry the hatch open. Ethan pushed harder, scraping his palms raw. A sliver of light appeared ahead, the end of the maintenance shaft. He shoved against the panel. It resisted, then gave way with a dull pop. He emerged behind a row of old filing cabinets in the Level 2 supply room. The overhead lights flickered uncertainly, some dying completely. Emergency lights glowed in pale amber along the baseboards, giving the hallway beyond a ghostly glow. "Lily," he whispered, stepping into the hall. Voices drifted from down the corridor, frantic, overlapping tents. Ethan sprinted toward them. At the intersection near the employee lounge, Margaret's assistant, a young woman named Holly, stood gripping Lily's hand. Her face was pale eyes darting toward the stairwells now sealed with metal shutters. Daddy Lily cried the moment she saw him. Ethan swept her into his arms, holding her tight, breathing her in like oxygen after near drowning. "I'm here," he whispered into her hair. "I've got you." Holly looked shaken. The lockdown triggered without warning. "I tried calling Ms. Hale, but the lines are dead. Security's everywhere." "Did any officer approach you?" Ethan asked, scanning the hall for signs of pursuit. "No," she said, voice trembling. "But they're checking rooms. They know something's wrong." Ethan nodded. "We have to move." He turned toward the back corridor, but froze. Victor stood at the far end, hands clasped behind him, flanked by 2 officers. His silhouette was calm, patient, like a man watching prey tire itself. "You're persistent, Brooks," he called down the hallway. "I'll give you that." Lily buried her face in Ethan's shoulder. Victor continued walking toward them, steps, slow, soundless, deliberate. "But this has gone far enough. The girl comes with us." Ethan's blood turned to ice. He shifted Lily behind his shoulder, shielding her from Victor's gaze. "You're not getting near her." Victor smiled almost pityingly. "You really don't understand how deep this goes. The files you hold implicate people whose influence goes far beyond this building. People who won't hesitate to remove obstacles." "Obstacles," Ethan repeated softly, fury simmering beneath every syllable. Victor's smile widened. "Yes, and right now, that's you." Margaret's voice rang out before he could take another step. "Victor Lang." Every head turned. Margaret strode into view from a side corridor, Daniel and Francis behind her. Her coat hung open, one hand steady at her side, the other clutching an access override panel she had ripped directly from the wall. "You're done," she said. Victor's expression froze. "You want to talk about consequences?" Margaret continued, voice echoing through the empty hall. "Then let's discuss the emergency board meeting I just triggered from the override channel." Victor blinked. "You're lying." "Am I?" She lifted the device. Every board member received a priority summons with evidence packages attached, including the files you thought you erased. Victor's composure shattered. "You didn't." "Oh, I absolutely did," Margaret said. "My father taught me never to keep all copies in one place." Daniel stepped beside her. "You lose Victor." The corridor pulsed with silence. Victor's officers looked uncertain now, glancing between him and their CEO. Ethan shifted Lily gently to his other arm. She peeked out, watching Margaret, as though she were some mythic hero stepping out of a storm. Finally, Victor exhaled a shaky laugh. "So this is how you want it. Public scandal ruined careers. A company collapsing under its own corruption, if that's what justice demands." Margaret said, "Then yes." Victor's face contorted. Rage, disbelief, fear, all collapsing into something feral. He lunged. But Ethan was already moving. He stepped forward, placing himself between Victor and Margaret, catching Victor's momentum with a shoulder and driving him back into the wall with a force that knocked the air from both men. Papers fluttered to the floor. The shock quieted the hall. Victor slid to the ground, breath-ragged fury burning in his eyes. Margaret faced him one last time. "It's over," she said quietly. "Stand down." Victor spat onto the floor. "This isn't over." He glared at Ethan. "Not for you, not for your daughter." Margaret nodded to Daniel. "Contain him." As officers moved to restrain Victor, Ethan turned to Margaret, breath heavy. What now? Margaret's gaze softened at Lily, then hardened with resolve. "Now," she said, "we end this properly. No more shadows, no more buried truths." She looked around the dim hallway, the sealed doors, the frightened employees peering from behind half-open office windows. "Northbridge is going to see exactly what it's been standing on," she said, "and tomorrow the world will too." A siren wailed through the building. Not a warning, an awakening. The wail of the internal sirens faded into a dull, rhythmic pulse as Margaret led the group toward the executive wing, each step backed by the weight of truths that had survived long enough to demand daylight. Ethan carried Lily close to his chest, her small arms wrapped around his neck as she watched the chaos unfolding around them with quiet, frightened focus. Employees peeked from doorways, whispering, retreating, sensing that something deeper than a procedural lockdown was unraveling across the building. Margaret's security override card flickered red, then green, as she unlocked the final reinforced door to the executive command suite. The corridor beyond was lined with glass offices overlooking the city, the windows reflecting the muted winter sky. At the end of the hallway, the boardroom doors stood tall, polished wood, gleaming like a courtroom waiting for its verdict. Daniel and Francis followed close behind their footsteps, steady but heavy. Victor, restrained by 2 officers, was dragged several paces back. No longer the man who strutted freely through the building, but someone suddenly aware of gravity he could no longer outrun. Inside the boardroom, a long mahogany table stretched beneath ceiling lights that buzzed faintly. Monitors along the walls displayed a frozen screen, "Emergency Session Active." Board members appeared in windows of the digital feed, faces stern, puzzled, irritated, or alarmed. They had been summoned without explanation, many dialing in from homes offices or cars, unaware of the battle that had just taken place beneath their corporate empire. Margaret took her place at the head of the table. Her posture carried none of the fear the others expected of a CEO whose company might collapse within the hour. Instead, she radiated calm resolve, the certainty of someone who had finally found the spine of her mission. "Thank you all for joining on short notice," she began, her voice steady across the room and through every speaker. "I've initiated this emergency session under Article 9 of our corporate charter, which permits unilateral convening when immediate threats to Northbridge's ethical integrity arise." A stir rippled across the screens. 2 board members exchanged glances. One whispered something out of frame. Margaret lifted a file from the table, the sealed envelope bearing Ethan's ID, and laid it carefully before her. For 15 years, a segment of Northbridge's leadership buried evidence of regulatory fraud, she said. Evidence that implicated individuals still employed in this company. Evidence that my father attempted to surface before he was silenced by a stroke brought on by the stress of the investigation. A voice crackled through the speaker. "Ms. Hale, we were told your father's health incident was unrelated." "Are you implying internal sabotage?" "I'm not implying," Margaret said. "I'm stating. The documentation in this room proves he was targeted. And so was Mr. Ethan Brooks." Ethan shifted slightly, Lily tightening her hold. He felt dozens of eyes, some digital, some in the room, turned toward him. Margaret lifted the second envelope. "And this," she continued, "is testimony from an anonymous contributor known as Gray Lantern, who risked their life to expose falsified compliance data. For 15 years, this testimony has been erased, rewritten, and discredited by the very people who profited from suppressing it." Frances trembled slightly beside Daniel. Her breath caught when Margaret spoke the words she had carried alone for so long. "Gray Lantern is Frances Miller," Margaret said. "A custodial employee whose contributions were never acknowledged because criminal actors within Northbridge believed she would never be found." Gasps burst from multiple screens. One board member leaned forward. "Why bring this forward now?" "Your stock will plummet. Investors will panic." Margaret didn't look away. "I'm bringing it forward because Northbridge deserves to be rebuilt on truth, not rot. And because the man responsible for burying that truth is still standing in this room." She nodded to the officers. They shoved Victor forward. He stumbled, then straightened, breathing hard, eyes burning with indignation. "This is a fabrication," he barked. "A calculated attempt to ruin my name. Hale has always been too sentimental for leadership. She's being manipulated by disgruntled employees." Daniel stepped forward, voice crisp. "You ordered the destruction of whistleblower files. You erased Frances Miller's employment records. You threatened Ethan Brooks 15 years ago and again today." Victor scoffed. "You have no proof." Margaret lifted Hale Sr.'s duplicated documents, the ones Frances had protected in silence for so long. "We have my father's handwritten notes. We have copies of the original data signatures. And we have testimony from internal witnesses who survived your intimidation." Victor's face drained as she placed the files beneath a document camera, broadcasting them to every board member's screen. One by one, the pages illuminated the room, data logs, internal memos, signatures, annotations, timestamps. A living map of the corruption Victor had orchestrated and hidden beneath layers of fear. A voice crackled again. "This is damning! Victor, do you deny these are your directives?" Victor said nothing. His jaw clenched. His eyes darted across the table, searching desperately for an ally. He found none. Another board member leaned in. "Ms. Hale, what actions do you propose?" Margaret straightened. "Effective immediately, I move to terminate Victor Lang for cause strip his stock privileges and refer all documentation to federal regulators and the Justice Department." Ethan watched Victor's expression collapse from fury to dread. He felt no triumph, only a slow, heavy release of the breath he had been holding for half his life. The digital screens buzzed as votes came through. Approved. 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 Unanimous. Victor lunged as if to speak, but words failed him. The officers tightened their grip and escorted him out of the boardroom. His footsteps echoed down the corridor until they vanished into silence. Margaret picked up the final envelope, the one tied to Ethan's whistleblower ID. She approached him slowly, Lily watching her with wide, curious eyes. "You were never meant to pay for what you uncovered." Margaret said, "My father tried to protect you, but the people around him were stronger than he realized. I'm sorry for everything this company took from your life." Ethan swallowed. "I didn't come here for an apology." "I know," she said. "You came here because it was time." She handed him the envelope. "And because you deserved to see the truth acknowledged." Frances stepped closer, her voice cracking. "We can finally breathe." Daniel nodded. "It's over." Margaret turned back to the board cameras. "Now we rebuild." For the first time that day, the building seemed to exhale. The tension in the walls loosened. The lights steadied. Doors clicked open as lockdown ended. Employees emerged cautiously, their eyes searching for signals of hope. Ethan looked at Lily, who tucked her head against his shoulder. He kissed her hair, overwhelmed by the knowledge that she would grow up in a safer world than the one that chased him. Margaret extended her hand. "Whatever future you want with this company employment collaboration or distance, we will honor it. But we would be stronger with you." Ethan nodded, not committing, not declining. For the first time in years, the choice was truly his. The board meeting dissolved. Screens went dark. The hum of the building softened into normalcy. Margaret stood at the window, looking over the city her father once tried to save, the city she now had a chance to redeem. Ethan turned toward the exit. Lily asleep again in his arms, the envelope tucked safely into his pocket. Frances walked beside him, Daniel just behind the four of them, stepping into a hallway washed clean by truth. Outside, snow drifted gently from the sky, quiet and forgiving. It fell over a company waking from a long nightmare, over a man reclaiming his life, and over a little girl whose future finally felt possible. If stories like this one moved you, stay with us, hit like, subscribe, and comment. 3 words: truth prevails always.